This is super effing fascinating right here from a political strategist perspective. We're going to talk about screw politics. We don't care about that. What we care about in terms of like the issues, we're caring about campaign strategy, what it means to be strategy, like what strategy is good for actually getting elected. And so this is actual like political campaign analysis in terms of strategies and things like that, right? And so this article says the quote basement strategy is working for Democrats. This is an opinion piece by Joe Concha. And so basically, you know, Sleepy Joe and all that stuff in 2020, remember that was the big attack. That was actually a beneficial thing for Joe because people wanted a sleepy guy after Donald Trump. They didn't want the bloviating guy anymore. They didn't want that guy. So American politics usually goes back and forth. You got Bill Clinton, super intelligent, very calculated, to George Bush, the fake idiot. He's not actually dumb. It was all a political ploy. But the fake dumb guy, you know, who's very, this, that, fool me once, you know, fool me twice, can't get fooled again, blah, blah. It was all fake. But anyways, like they go back and forth, right? And so these crazy Trumpsters like, Kari Lake in Arizona running for the governorship who lost, saying that, I don't know where my husband is, but Trump is the number one man in my life, right? So it's like just straight cucking her husband, right? These kinds of crazy people, they just talk and yap. They're just echo chamber, yap. And so Trump's base really helped him win, but they've now gone too far into the base to the point where they've alienated basically everybody else, including independents being the most important people, right? And so what the strategy is now, let them like yap to their crazy base and then just win. So it says Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs will be the next governor of Arizona, barring a recount that says otherwise. That's obviously not going to change it. When a Democrat is sworn in, likely thank her handlers privately for their media strategy and getting her over the finish line after looking like the underdog going into Election Day against outspoken Republican Kari Lake. I think Katie Hobbs just didn't really say anything for much of the race. I don't think anybody really knew much about Hobbs, and I saw a post on Twitter like comparing their Twitter followerships. So clearly it's like, like I think she ran that low-key kind of campaign. It says Hobbs embraced the same strategy that served Joe Biden as a candidate and continues to serve him as president, almost entirely avoiding the media, shunning any interviewer who may ask a tough question, and rejecting the opportunity to debate an opponent. Hobbs did all three, got some benign criticism for it, and still won a razor-thin victory. Now, I'm not in favor of just not doing debates. I think that's super dangerous. You need to have debates, whether you're president, whoever, you have to have debates. You have to have interviews, too. It's really bad. But it says, quote, it's clear that Kari Lake is much more interested in creating a spectacle and having the spotlight than actually having a substantive discussion about the issues, Hobbs recently told NBC's Meet the Press when asked why she would not debate Lake. The answer got little pushback from the moderator. So imagine that. Telling voters you want to have a substantive discussion about the issues while simultaneously running from the debate stage to facilitate such a discussion and doing so with a straight face. Hobbs topped Lake, a Trump-backed election denier anyway. It cites John Fetterman, and then it also cites Kathy Hochul, which I think is actually a really bad example because she was just like a bad like candidate, period. She performed really, really shittily. But then it goes into a second point of this, which kind of jumps into two separate like political science topics, right? In political science, one of the big like analyses is about like the president and the media, or just like elected officials in the media, right? As well as, strategy of campaigning. So this is kind of both, because Biden is now just like not really talking to the press, if at all, really. And so Donald Trump actually helped this a lot because he basically eroded the public trust in the media entirely. And so now nobody gives a fuck what the media says, not even the slightest. And there's no such thing as like a arbiter of truth or anyone that anybody takes seriously. Everyone is just like everyone is just like an epistemological relativist at this point. Hey, some Joe Bob, Billy Bob 2534 on Twitter says is the same thing as anybody on TV says, right? Everything. So completely eroded the trust in media. So there's no like real trust in media anymore. And Trump, did a lot of that. And so because of that, Biden can get away with not talking to any press because nobody trusts the press because of Trump, right? So it's like, oh shit, that came back and bit your ass because now Biden can hide in the basement and nobody gives a fuck because guess what? Nobody likes the press. Nobody cares about the press. Nobody respects the press. And that's because of you. You did that. You made nobody respect the press. That was your whole strategy. That was your whole 2016 strategy, was to just completely demonize the press, make them the enemy of the people, because then it makes him immune to any criticism, because then anything they say, nobody will trust it, and then he can just keep doing it over and over again. George W. Bush, if you don't know, I learned this through my political science readings. He also hated the press, but his strategy was to just keep them at arm's length and not publicly be like super against them, but privately he was like, yeah, I don't like these guys. He didn't view them as having any role, kind of like Trump did. He said he only read the sports pages. And then he actually created like the access media era where it's like, I'm only going to give few interviews to people who support me, like Fox News and stuff. He created that whole thing. He started that whole thing because he didn't like the press. And so the era of having like, your Ted Koppels and those kinds of people and Dan Rather and all these people who are supposed to be like, no matter what side you're on, you have to do interviews with them. That just ended with George W. Bush. And so this kind of goes into like two eras of these like whole things of political science. But super fascinating stuff. Look here, check this out. This media analyst Steve Krakauer told me recently that while social media has allowed candidates to connect directly with voters while bypassing the gatekeepers in the media, there's another key element that plays into the strategy. If the corporate media were still respected and trusted by the public, there would be demands by the public that politicians undergo scrutiny from the press, Krakauer, a former CNN producer, told me. But because trust and relevance has eroded so spectacularly, particularly in recent years, the public no longer sees an incentive to have a politician sit for a challenging interview. The politicians see that as an opening for them to avoid the press, and the media has no one to blame but themselves. And so you can see that. And so basically, the press is essentially powerless in terms of like with this whole presidents and stuff. They're not powerless in terms of like the news that they cover is very, very, very influential in a lot of pockets, right? And they still control the general narrative. But if you're a president and an elected candidate like Biden in 2020, and you're doing this weird stuff where it's like, yo, dude, like you're running for president, you have to talk to press. Like, we don't even see you. Where are you? You're in the basement. And no one gives a fuck because Trump destroyed the trust of the American people in the press. And that was his whole 2016 strategy. But that bit him in the ass in 2020 because at that point, people just hated Trump. And so instead of Biden going and doing press interviews and getting shat on, instead, what ends up happening is Biden just gets to go off scot-free with nothing. And that's simply for the fact that no one trusts the media, so he has no reason to go on there. He doesn't have to go on there. Whereas back in the days, in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, you had to go on like Brokaw or fucking like Cronkite or like whatever, these kinds of people. Like, these people held serious weight where millions upon millions would watch them and seriously take what they said seriously. That just doesn't exist anymore. People like Rather and those guys who would always get the interviews with president, no matter what side they were on, that died with George W. Bush. And so now you have a situation where no one trusts the press at all, and that bit Trump in the ass, and that was his whole strategy in 2016. Super fascinating. But with these loonies, this is the correct strategy to do. Stick to your message, and you want to stick to your message too. Obviously, the campaign strategy is identify your constituency, identify what that constituency likes, pick those main, like, you want to stick to like 3 to no more than 5, but you want to stick to around 3 issues that is like the most potent with that constituency, and then you stay on message. You never get off message. So if you're a Democrat, don't talk about crime because you're not going to convince any Republicans on crime, and you're not going to be able to, get any more Democrats to come out. No Democrat's going to come out and vote, yeah, to crime. That's not going to work for Democrats. That'll work for Republicans. And so if you start talking about crime, like, whoa, instead of talking about Roe versus Wade, you start talking about crime, or instead of talking about like, the Stop the Steal thing or whatever, and these kinds of things, like you find abortion, you find that kind of stuff, really mainly abortion, but then there was, Trump and that kind of stuff. You just hammer it, bro, just pound it, bro, like don't stop. Don't ever get off message. So you combine that with the basement strategy of sending your tweets, stay on message on your tweets, talk about Roe versus Wade. And man, I just love the strategy aspect of political science for campaigning. And it is awesome really to see how the political science studying of like how media is with like presidency and stuff like that is coming into play here. But truly fascinating stuff.